Hello, everyone. Pierre and I have prepared a presentation for you. Is midterm the new short term? And we're basically analyzing whether midterm could provide a short-term solution to property managers around the world. And we're not saying that this is the only solution at this difficult time, but certainly one that you could analyze as part of your marketing mix. Having a really strong marketing mix is important, was important before this happened, and will also be important in the future. So well worth finding out whether this could be part of your strategy. Bit of housekeeping, please keep your video and microphone off, and no need to take screenshots, as I will send you the PDF of this presentation. So Transparent tracks 21 million listings. So Pierre is the CEO of Transparent. That's what they do. They're a data company, and they help property managers look at trends in terms of rates, demands, and supply. He can tell you much better what he does. After I will give the microphone to him, and myself, I'm co-founder and marketing director of Rentals United. Sorry, Rentals United is a channel manager, and we distribute automatically 150,000 listings onto small and large OTAs. So we're not a data company, but we do sit on a lot of data because we see every single booking come in from OTAs. So we see lengths of stay, pricing, who books what, basically. So I am going to share a few stats with you, keeping in mind that we're not a data company, but we were able to share some of the data with you. So in terms of the agenda tonight, first I'm going to pass over to Pierre, who is going to talk to us about the trends that they see in terms of the data that they're looking at, this huge amount of data. And myself, I will support what Pierre says with our stats. And I will also look at midterm specialized channels that could potentially help you in your area. These channels are here tonight, and they're on mute. But I will, if you have questions for them, I will ask them to come online. And how to find channels. So, in case the channels that we cover tonight are not in your region, are not available in your region, I'm going to show you ways to find channels that potentially could help you. And also, lastly, I will end on tips on how to maximize your exposure. Then the Q&A, and please don't ask us questions for your particular location. We can't answer those right now, but however, both our teams would be most happy to talk to you after the webinar or separately with all the questions that you may have. We're very, very happy to help. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone to Pierre for his presentation.
Hi, Vanessa. Thanks for having me in this webinar. So I'm going to start and go ahead and share my screen and introduce myself. All right. So my name is Pierre. I'm the founders of Transparent. I'm going to tell you about my company in an instant, just so you know where I am. I'm actually based in Madrid. So I'm calling you from my apartments now. I'm under lockdown. So we're one of the cities that are, heavily impacted by the current crisis. So, we experienced firsthand because we live in an area that is impacted, and we've also experienced it as a business and as a partners of a lot of property managers that have been impacted. Okay, so just to give a little bit of context to everyone. In terms of our company, we're a benchmarking intelligence company dedicated to short-term rentals. So we track 34 million listings worldwide, and we provide intelligence to property managers, real estate investors who want to understand the competitive landscape, how much inventory is out there, and also understand seasonality trends and pricing strategies. So this is a little bit about us, but here we're not here to speak too much about our company, but more about what's going on in the market. So I wanted to start here with this presentation with a fact, which is that we're on the front line of a global health and economic crisis, right? Obviously, all of the sector of the economy are affected, but we're really on the front line. And today, as a start, I would like to introduce you a little bit about the consequences of this of this crisis on our industry, and then I will move on to one of the opportunities that we have is to look at a midterm rental market. Okay, so that's a little bit the plan about today. So moving ahead, I would like to share with you one of the websites that we've put together especially for this crisis. It's actually available on our website on seetransparent.com. So if you go on our website, you'll get a pop-up notification, or you can also access it directly through this link right here. And basically, we're trying to put some free resources for property managers. We'll include as well this webinar in here, and we'll continue to upload this information with new data to let everyone understand the real impact, as well as monitor potential ways and potential opportunities in this market, and as well monitor when things gets back to normal. All right, so this is one of the things that we're going to have here, and I'm going to present with you some of the metrics that we present in this presentation. And the first point I want to make is that really this crisis we're living is not only a health crisis, but it's also a mobility crisis, right? We moved from being able to travel everywhere, for a few $100s, we could go to so many countries in the world, to now being confined at home. So we've got 1 billion people in the planet that are right now locked down in their home, right? So this is really very much a mobility crisis. We can't even go more than 1 kilometer away for most of us. So this has impacted obviously travel, but it has impacted the entire economy. So I just wanted to show you that we really are on the front line here, because if you look at the stock market and how the OTAs, so the company that we work with to get reservations, have been impacted, it's pretty incredible. At some point in March, the OTAs like Expedia, Booking.com altogether lost 42 billion of their values in the stock market. So it really gives you an idea of how investors are looking at the space and how important this crisis is, especially for travel. All right. So obviously, we've all seen this happen in our market, but basically cancellations have been very, very strong lately. Normally, they've maintained quite low rates. So you can see here in February, until the point where really the crisis hits and become really hard. And basically the World Health Organization announced the pandemic. And basically that's when we could start to see all of these terrible cancellation wave that have slowed down since then, but because basically there's less reservation to cancel now. So as a consequence of that, obviously the global demand has been dropping tremendously. So this is the chart of the demand. In blue you've got last year, and in green you've got this year. So you can see how much a drop since February, since mid-end February has happened in the market. And these are the reservations that are still on the book today. So on the positive side, people have still maintained some reservation for summer. For those of you for whom summer is important, you can see there's still reservation, but obviously a lot less are being made. And it's definitely going to be a very, very difficult year for the entire industry. Okay, so one point I think is important here is that obviously we're on the front line of this crisis, but I think a lot of the other sectors of the economy are really impacted, tremendously. And if you look at real estate and our owners, basically they're certainly in the front line, but everyone else will also be impacted. So hotel owners are also impacted, and a lot of hotel operators are calling out force majeure or this basically a clause that allow them to not pay rent because this is an external event that is unpredictable and completely external to them. And this is also impacting commercial landlords. All the retailers, they have a hard time collecting their rent these days. Office landlords, the same thing, and even multi and single family. So the landlords renting regular long-term property. So it's really impacting every landlord in the world, not only our landlords doing short-term rental. So I think that's very important to take into account. And now just looking a little bit at the data, how this has impacted, some of the metrics that you see. Well, one of the first metric here is lead time. Obviously, lead time have dropped. It basically has dropped since the beginning of the crisis. So the few reservations that are still there are made, with a shorter period closer to the check-in, and basically there is less reservation that are being made for the future because there's just so much uncertainty, right? But looking at lengths of stay, I think we see also some very interesting trend here, and I think Vanessa is going to also share some numbers around that later. But basically, lengths of stay has increased since the crisis. So what we can see is that globally it has almost doubled or even tripled in some point in time. And we're seeing the few reservations that we're seeing are actually much longer than they used to be for the same time last year. Okay, and this is also due for a lot of travels related to coronavirus, and especially right before the lockdown, a lot of travelers are trying to escape their big cities and go to areas that are a bit more rural or a lot less affected, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen these higher lengths of stay. Okay, so looking at geography, well, you can see that lengths of stay has been growing basically in most of the important markets, and we've just put some example here. But obviously there's much less reservation, but the few reservations that are still coming are basically longer. Okay, so all of these sort of weekend travel and shorter stays is basically even more affected by the crisis. So looking into this, we want to talk together about strategic solutions for your business, right? So there are three main angles that we see immediately at Transparent. One is obviously applying and marketing sanitization practices. So advertising the fact that you're doing efforts to make sure your properties are safe for your workers and for the guests. But that is being discussed already, and there's a lot of material you can find, including on Rentals United blog. You can also basically focus and get ready for local and domestic travel, and we can discuss about that another time, but we're very convinced on our side that domestic and local travel was going to be the first one to pick up, and we need to prepare for that. And today what brings us together is the diversification or the opportunities to do midterm stays. Okay, so I'm going to move ahead and discuss a little bit about midterm. One important point here, and that is sharing our own point of view, but we think that even though we are living a very strong mobility crisis today, we think that this crisis basically is going to convert into a catalyst for more mobility later. So just give you some interesting points to reflect on. We're on Zoom right now, this platform to chat and communicate. And if you look at Google Trends, I just pulled that yesterday, you could see that basically Zoom has been searched more than 10 times compared to the normal period the months before, right? So 10 times more people are using Zoom currently, we could infer. But basically companies are preparing to work on remote. We're being forced to do this experiment, and as a consequence, what we believe is that a lot of companies will end up actually adopting this experience. And even though if it's only a small percentage of this company, a lot more people will be able to have much more mobility after this crisis. So if you look at those numbers, this is the percentage of people in Europe, just put the European example here, that usually work from home. So, 4 or 5%. And then you've got around 9% of people who actually work from time to time from home, right? So all of these people, we think it's going to be a growing share of the working population, and this will give birth to much more mobility in the future, which means that the market potential for midterm rental, in our opinion, is going to grow a lot after in the exit of this crisis, right? And so with this introduction, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about midterm rental from the data perspective, okay? Obviously, we're a data company, and we want to look at this business from what are the important KPIs and metrics that you should be looking at when you consider diversifying to midterm. The first important KPI here is monthly revenue. So in midterm, you don't really look at daily rate. It's less relevant. That's obvious, but it's important to take into account. Another point that is important is the number of requests that you receive before you get a reservation. Okay, this is not similar as short term, in the sense that instant booking doesn't work necessarily the same, and it's important to take into account how many requests you get before you actually book. The time to reservation is super important because it's going to help you calculate your actual occupancy over the year. So if you have to wait 3 months before you get a reservation, it's not a very good sign. So time to reservation is very important. And finally, lengths of stays also help you calculate your occupancy and your cost of operations. So these are the 4 points we think we should look at. And now we're just going to discuss a little bit about supply. So as an example, we took some of the important markets for midterms in Europe and look at some numbers. We used those numbers from the website directly of our friends Spotahome, which is one of the midterm booking platforms that you can connect to through Rentals United here. And we look at how they compare with Airbnb listings by market. So it's interesting to see that some of the big markets have got so much more short-term rental supply. For instance, London and Paris got a lot more short-term rental supply. They're also, we have to say, the largest market in the world for short-term rentals. So that also impacts. And you can see below here, there are some cities that are really, really friendly to students. And I think that also impacts the fact that they've got a lot to offer for the midterm market. Okay. So, you can make this own exercise in your market to understand how you compare with these other cities. Here we looked at the same in the United States. So I would just, shout out to the ones that have less short-term rental supply compared to midterm, which is San Francisco and Boston, which have quite restrictive policies around short-term rental. This also correlated with the different local, policies. Okay, so now let's jump into the time to reservation. I think this one is interesting. It's been provided to us by our friends at Housing Anywhere that you can also connect to through the Renters United, and have been great in sharing some interesting numbers with us. So basically, this is going to tell us basically an interesting distribution in terms of how long does it take to take your first reservation after you've listed your property. Okay, so an important point here basically is that 40% of the reservation happens within 10 days. Okay, and that's very important because it gives you an idea of how fast you can get how long your property is going to stay empty, basically. And what you see here are all of these reservations, that have occurred a long time after the listing was put, basically are a sign that the listing could be improved by a lot. Basically maybe it was missing pictures, or they weren't great, or the amenities were not filled properly, or the description wasn't filled, or the price was simply way too high and the property stayed empty too long. So when you do midterm rental, look at time to reservation. This is going to be one of your most important metrics. Okay, another metric we're looking at here is the one I mentioned earlier: how many requests before you get the booking. And this one is a little counterintuitive. You would say it's bad to get too many requests, but actually it's the other way around. If you get a lot of requests, it also means that your property is very attractive, and maybe a lot of people are just reaching out to book it, right? So those are important metrics to look together. And basically, our friends from Housing Anywhere mentions that 25% of the reservations require 2 inquiries or less. Okay, basically, these are the stats in the market that they operate. Okay, so now let's move to the rates. Okay, we're looking at how rates compare between midterm and short-term rental. Okay, so these are just some metrics we took here for studio apartments and how they compare in the top European cities that we looked at before. So you can see that there's quite a big range of differences between midterm rental and short-term rental. Right? In Paris, for instance, leading the way, short-term rental are making much more than midterm rentals. It's also important to note here that this does not take into account occupancy. So when you're going to achieve basically higher occupancy on midterm rental market, you're going to have lower occupancy on short-term rental and much more seasonality. So it's important to take into account and factor it. Here we've just brought the rates to their daily prices to make them comparable. So when you look at rates, take into account importantly the occupancy, but also your cost, because obviously the cost of operation on doing short-term rental is very different from midterm rental. You don't have the same frequency of cleaning, you don't have the same cost for checking, for operations, and for distribution in general. The cost breakdowns are slightly different. So important to bear this into account. But you can see you make more money on short-term rental than on midterm rental overall without taking into consideration occupancy or cost. And this is the same data here for the US. So San Francisco is a bit of an exception here because basically there's such, if you want a housing crisis in San Francisco, that there is a tremendous demand for all kind of accommodation, and midterm rental are actually making quite a lot of money, right? So when you make this analysis, make sure you factor in all of your costs so you can really compare what's the delta. An important point as well, and again, this is from our friend from Housing Anywhere, basically showing us seasonality on midterm. Well, seasonality is much less pronounced on midterm than short term. And what you can see is that basically rates are pretty constant over time, right? So this is obviously not taking into account the current crisis, and we'll see how this is impacting as well midterm. But you can see that overall, in a normal period, basically rates are much more flat. Okay? And another data point that is interesting is length of stay. So, the data shows here that 74% of the reservations are for 3 to 12 months. So you can imagine how this is impacting the cost of operations. Much less check-ins to deal with, much less cleaning, and at the end of the day, a bit of stability, which is very important in these complicated times. All right, so what could you do to pivot to midterm? Well, and Vanessa is going to help you a little bit here, but basically, looking at new channel opportunities, diversifying your channels, and very importantly, preparing your rate structure for these longer stays. So apply aggressive discount for people who wants to escape the areas where they are in, and prepare it for weekly or even for monthly discount. I think this is very important, and this is going to determine your success on midterm. And in general, obviously, want to say that midterm is not a safe haven that hasn't been impacted. Obviously, midterm rental has also been impacted because, like we said earlier, there's a mobility crisis. But it's a way that you can get some extra booking and guarantee some revenue if you can capture some of the demand that is out there, right? So it's an interesting thing to explore, and I think Vanessa will be able to tell you some more tips on how to best do that. Vanessa, that's it for me. If you want, I can stop sharing and give you back the screen.
Thank you. Cheers, Pierre. Sorry about that. So I pulled out some figures from countries around the world where we have property managers. This is the average of nights booked. So because there's a decrease in short-term rental bookings, meaning 3-4 nights, etc., and there's an increase in longer-term bookings, we see this enormous jump everywhere around the world. In terms of booking window as well, so here you were looking at booking window, and we see a sharp increase in the number of nights booked for bookings today. That's what we call last minute, so day 0, and in the next 2 months. So people are traveling in more than 60 days. The average number of nights is pretty much the same as last year. So it would appear that we now have a window of opportunity to get longer stay bookings. Now, as Pierre was mentioning, to encourage longer stay bookings, you need to work on your lengths of stay pricing, also called the LOS pricing. Here on the left, you can see what we have in the back end of our software and how it can be set up. The idea is to say, if you stay 7 nights, the price is discounted, and you can go on up until all the way to 30 nights or more. So I'm sure you already play with your price per night, and hopefully you're using a yield manager for that. But you may also have a price. You also have a price per guest, but you have a length of stay pricing. And important to have one. So if you have a software, if you're working for a software today that doesn't allow for LOS, worth looking into one that allows it and allows you to push these prices onto the different OTAs. So now I'm going to look at different websites that we work with. This is not an exhaustive list. They don't come in any order. These guys focus on midterm bookings. They're connected to us. And they're also here in the Zoom meeting, hopefully. I've invited them. So if you have questions specifically for them, you can ask them and they will come online and answer them. So HomeLike is a marketplace for long-term 30+ days business apartments. They have a portfolio of rentals in 400 cities in Europe, and their customers are executives, professionals, expatriates, consultants, and trainees from around the world. Now, what we do for each and every channel that we want to integrate with is that we kind of do a background research, and we put this fact sheet together that I'm sharing with you now, looking at the inventory, the business model, the technology, how do they get their traffic, and I think a few things that are really important to look at. Obviously, the first thing that managers look at is the commission, but this is not the only important bit. The average booking value is one. The average number of nights, and here it's 90, and for the rest as well. And whether you're the merchant of record or not. Merchant of record means, do you collect the money from the guest, or does HomeLike, the channel, collect money from the guest? If it's you collecting, then obviously you need to be set up with some kind of payment provider, right? And then we look at traffic sources. Where did that traffic come from? And one of the really important aspects as well is to find out whether they had investment. Because if the investment community, the venture capitalist community, believes in this OTA and invests in it in a time where you have giant OTAs like Airbnb and Booking.com and Hanoi, etc., then there must be something to it: longevity, money to market, etc. So these are the kind of research I would recommend you do, and the HomeLike is connected to us, and we're very good partners with them. A wonderful site to be on if they cover your area. They're mainly in Europe. And HowStay is mainly in the US. So they have a number of cities in the US, and they're growing those cities as far as I understand. Again, we do our fact sheet. In this case, HowStay is the merchant of record. They collect the money for you and then pay you out. The fee is very attractive, only 5% commission. And if you look at the average booking value, it's very, very high. They also will book you for 3 months. And they have a really healthy traffic rank. I will show you later how to find out about the traffic rank. And they get traffic from USA, from Europe, and from India as well. Right. The next one is Spot-A-Home, and they have a unique value proposition in Spot-A-Home in the sense that they visit all of the apartments that you advertise with them. They're strong in Europe, and they target student, expats, and professionals. And I think the fact that they visit all the apartments is great, because it's very daunting for people who want to stay longer term to not know. It's daunting to book online, basically. So they do that, and they do that in Madrid, Barcelona, London, Milan, Rome, Brussels, Dublin, Valencia, Lisbon, and Paris for the moment, but I'm sure they're growing more cities in Europe. And these are the kind of fees that they charge. They already have 100,000 listing, and there are 400 people working for them. And they signed 2 years ago a $40 million investment, which is pretty considerable. And their traffic rank is good, so they have money to invest in marketing. Very well worth talking to these guys as well. Altavita is the last one on my list. Their average booking nights is between 4 to 6 weeks, and they focus on business and family homes. They do the check-in, and they provide local services to support guests. They have 52 locations across Europe, so well worth finding out if your location is in there. They're kind of the new kids on the block. They're only 2 years old, and they already got some investment, so that's promising. And they take the money for you and send it out to you afterwards. They have already 8,000 listings for a young site. That's really good. And they get their top listing countries are England, Spain, and Portugal. If you're located in these regions, well worth talking to them. Now, these sites that I showed you, you may know or may not know, but the ones that you see online now, I'm sure you've heard of one or two of them. And these guys also have a midterm strategy in place. Airbnb just reported that they had a 30% increase in midterm bookings in March. Agoda just started a midterm strategy also in March. So all of these sites, we have seen longer term bookings happening on them. So if you are not advertising on them, please have a look. They do cover, a lot of regions. And if you do advertise on them, make sure you get your length of stay pricing right on these sites as well. Now, not all of the sites I mentioned will apply to all of the regions of the people who are here today and listening today. So another trick, what you can do in order to find websites that could potentially help you in your midterm strategy is to go onto Google and to type the following keywords and see what comes up on page 1. and also what comes up in terms of paid marketing. And then contact these sites, do the same kind of background search that we do, find out about investment, find out about traffic. To find out about traffic in an easy way, you can go to SimilarWeb, type the URL of the website you found, and see how they get their traffic. And yeah, I think this is a nice trick. Also, if you have a book direct strategy and you're looking to expand into midterm bookings, then these are the kind of keywords you'd want to rank for. So you'd want your website to rank for, right? Something I would recommend for larger property managers, maybe not the smaller ones, because you know, and working with specialists is very important if you have a book direct strategy, because you could lose a lot of money paying for ads on Google, etc. Recommendation for maximum exposure. So one thing that the channels that we work with tend to complain about is the fact that because most of our customers are used to shorter stay bookings, they don't find enough availability within the calendar to book for 28 nights. So I think if you're serious about putting some of your inventory, if you're serious about putting some of your inventory onto a midterm strategy, then you know, be consistent, make 28 nights minimum on all of the channels where you advertise it on, and so that the midterm, so that people looking for midterm may find availability with you. Address pricing, I think that's very clear. All fees included. This is another thing. There's a lot of ambulances. I apologize. Not awful. All fees included. And another thing that's important for these guys is professional invoicing, having an online rental contract, and having a direct contact person available at all times. Now, amenities that you could highlight, fully furnished, goes without saying. Fast internet, washing machine, secure accommodation, Netflix or other streaming services, and a laptop-friendly workspace. Obviously, don't advertise this if you don't have them. And on your description, ideal for long-term stays, comfortable staycation unit, suitable for children. Staycation, as Pierre was mentioning, is one of the definite trends that we see at the moment in the OTA world. So we will prepare another webinar on this subject in the next 2 weeks and give you some tips on how to attract people who are traveling not so far from home. Some further reading, I will send you the links. The ebook, The Who's Who of Short-Term Rental Listing Sites, has a number of niche listing sites that you may not know, and that could be good to, again, explore and see if they fit your rentals. Also, I highly recommend the podcast The Secret Sauce of Large Property Managers, which basically large property managers with over 1,000 properties are giving away how they do their business and how they grow, how they scale. So a lot of lessons to be learned from these interviews, and I will send you the link for that as well. If you wanted a demo with us, so streamlining your distribution via Channel Manager, that's what we do. We'll be most happy to help you out, of course, and answer any questions you have. Please keep safe, everyone, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Vanessa, for organizing that.
Bye, Pierre.